Hi, I'm Daryl Jones, Director of Research at Hedgeye. I'm joined with my colleague JT Taylor from our Potomac research team down in Washington. We're going to jump right into politics and what's happening in the presidential election. You know, the first and kind of most important topic, obviously, is the upcoming primary in South Carolina. And you know, JT, I just want to start off with Donald Trump. Looks like it's going to be a runaway for him in South Carolina. What do you think's driving the enthusiasm behind Trump?
You know, it's sort of this angst that's been there, not just on the Republican side, but on the Democratic side as well, fueling the Bernie Sanders momentum. So it's angst, it's disenchantment with the establishment right now, and just politics in general.
Right.
And the fact that government and politics and politicians aren't working for them. So you have two, especially in Trump, you have this anti-politician on one side, and you have on the Sanders side, sort of
anti-establishment,
yeah, anti-establishment guy there. So it's that's what's fueling most of this right now.
Yeah. So as we look at South Carolina, I mean, unless there's a shocker in the next couple of days, Trump's gonna win South Carolina. But really, the race now is for second place. And how do you think second place plays out, and what does that mean for the candidate that wins second place?
Yeah, that's interesting. Governor Nikki Haley endorsed Marco Rubio, which probably will give his shot at second place a bit of a boost.
Yep.
I don't typically believe these endorsements do that, but in this case, it may. She's very popular in the state, but again, she's establishment and a sitting governor. So we'll see how that plays out. But second place, I mean, whoever comes out at second place will have some momentum going into Nevada next week and then Super Tuesday. Rubio needs a commanding second place victory to gain that momentum and probably some dollars. The field needs to winnow sooner than later, though, for a Rubio. I mean, there's a lesser chance for a Bush or a Kasich to emerge here, but yep. The sooner somebody rises up out of this sort of the establishment ashes, the better off their candidacy is right now. But you know, as you said, you know, Trump really he's the front runner. He's got momentum. His polling numbers across the board are the same. So we're looking at anywhere between 35 and 40% of these primary states. So he truly is the one to beat, but he's capped there. So your point of having somebody else come out of South Carolina, a strong second place finisher coming out of South Carolina, is important for him to be challenged here on in. He could run the table soon thereafter, though.
So the one person you didn't mention is Ted Cruz. Is it because you don't think he's going to do particularly well in South Carolina?
No, I think he is, and I think Cruz will do well. And Cruz is a sleeper here, so you're apt to point that out, Daryl. Cruz is a true sleeper here, only because he's got money and organization beyond these early states. So if you look at some of the Super Tuesday states on March 1st. If you look throughout the rest of the primary states in March and April, he's got organizations in all those states. And the worst kept secret is the fact that Cruz has more money in the bank than anyone else. Look, South Carolina is fertile ground for Ted Cruz. If he doesn't come in second, people are going to start questioning his ability to go the long haul or to take on a Trump.
Right, that makes sense. So the other interesting thing that's happened recently is, Jeb Bush, who had always on some level almost tried to distance himself from his brother. You know, his campaign was Jeb ! So focused on his first name rather than his last name. And there's probably a rational reason for that. But now, President Bush II, President George W. Bush, he's been involved more actively, particularly in South Carolina. He's actually become popular with his retirement. Do you think this actually helps Jeb to some extent? Because really it is a race for the establishment in second place. And how do you think this increasing influence of his brother, helps or hurts Jeb?
Yeah, I go back to something I learned early on in politics, and that's that endorsement, as I said a couple of minutes ago, endorsements matter, but at the end of the day, the voters are going to vote for the person and the passion behind that person. And so, George W. may help his brother, he may help drive turnout, but right now the polling isn't showing that. He's still in the high single digits in one poll, and in another poll he's sort of bunched up there in second place with the others.
He hasn't done very well in the initial primary states either, right?
No, and again, they're going to vote for Jeb and not George W.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. At one point, Ben Carson was right behind Donald Trump as sort of the second person on the list for the Republicans, somebody that in theory looked like had a shot at the nomination. Now the big question is, does Ben Carson, does he still have a heartbeat? Is he on life support? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think even at one point, not to correct you, I think at one point he was actually leading in the polls, or at least a few polls. So part of this is ego. Once you're leading or one of the top two guys, you think you have what it takes to become the nominee or become president. One, two, some of it is potentially fueled by amassing a few delegates along the way so he can be a player at the Republican convention in Cleveland. And three, I think there is this vendetta now against Cruz, who pulled a couple of dirty tricks against him in Iowa. Carson probably could have garnered a few more delegates in Iowa, but there was a tweet sent out by one of the Cruz operatives basically saying that Carson was going to
drop out,
take a detour to Florida, change his clothes, and essentially step out of the race, which caused probably some of those Carson supporters to jump over to Cruz at the end of the day. So there is an element of revenge, maybe, or of a vendetta at play here on the side of Ben Carson.
Yep, that makes sense.
He has no shot.
Yep. So sticking with the Republicans, as we sort of look forward, Super Tuesday onto the convention, it seems like it's Trump and then anybody but Trump, and that's sort of what the establishment wants. How do you think this, and I'm sure we're going to have a number of conversations about this over the next few months, and it's going to change a lot, but we're at the convention. How do you think this plays out? Presumably at that point, Trump maybe doesn't have a majority of delegates, but he has the most delegates. What actually happens here? I mean, there's so many different scenarios, but maybe you could sort of, in your mind right now, what's your thinking, and based on sort of your contacts in the Republican Party, what's the view?
I mean, if he does win big this coming weekend, I don't think there will be a brokered convention. I think if he wins big this weekend, he is gaffe prone, but we've seen that gaffes haven't stopped him. I think 8 or 9 different times through the course of this campaign. So the momentum from South Carolina to Nevada into Super Tuesday could carry him on through, and a brokered convention, it won't even be a consideration. But if it does become a brokered convention, it will be chaotic. I mean, there's no doubt about it, and the candidates are preparing for it right now. So if a candidate doesn't win 8 primary states and attain 1,237 delegates, then it's thrown into a second ballot.
Right.
And so right now you see a lot of the candidates. You see Bush doing it. You see Rubio doing it. Kasich, Cruz, and Carson probably to a lesser extent. They are sort of buttonholing a lot of these delegates, even if they are committed to somebody else. They're still trying not to get on their bad side, if you will, and make sure they have an accounting for who all these bodies, where all these bodies are, who these people are, to make sure that they know that their vote counts. So there's this incredible outreach effort that I've never seen before to make sure that existing delegates and future delegates that are at stake who may be committed to one candidate are trying to keep an open mind toward Bush's candidate, for example, on a second. So it's different than in the past as well. The party rules have changed, and before, the vision of a smoke-filled room by a bunch of old white men sitting there smoking cigars, choosing the next Republican or Democratic nominee is no longer the case. I mean, you do have a lot of, the difference this time around is you do have a lot of grassroots activists as delegates who will be present, who will be a force. Those are the people that the campaigns are focusing on right now. There is representation by the party hierarchy. So there are a few state party chairmen and so-called members of Congress who will be influential here as well. But it's going to come down to brass tacks and these activists. The grassroots activists.
That makes sense. So flipping over to the Democratic side, which is, on some levels much simpler, but on some levels even more complicated. The big question right now to people is can the establishment candidate Hillary Clinton hold off Bernie Sanders? A lot of the momentum seems to be shifting towards Bernie. I'm an active reader of the Drudge Report, so maybe I'm biased, but it seems like every new headline as it relates to Hillary is something that's negative. Either it's her husband going off cue, questions about her health, more about the email scandal. And meanwhile, Bernie seems to be narrowing the polls. What happens between those two in both South Carolina and Nevada, in your estimation?
Yeah, as with polling this morning, it shows them neck and neck. I think Clinton is up by 1 point in Nevada and up by 15 or 20 in South Carolina, even though it's closing. I think the Hispanic vote in Nevada, which is not necessarily, everyone thought that it would break toward Clinton, is on the fence right now. So I think there are a lot of undecided Hispanic voters in Nevada. If they break Bernie's way, we'll give him a victory on this coming Saturday. He will take that momentum into South Carolina, where I believe she'll stop him. But then we advance to Super Tuesday, again with a very wounded Hillary Clinton and with Bernie Sanders with a lot of momentum. So he could pick up, on Super Tuesday, you have a lot of southern states like Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Oklahoma, but you have Massachusetts, Vermont, Massachusetts and a number of other northern states that Bernie could pick off. So he's in it for the long haul, plus money, the money is coming in to the Sanders campaign, and that's going to keep him here for a while. So if it gets to the point where Sanders could be in this, or Sanders stays in this, is damaging Clinton enough and maybe has a shot at the nomination, I believe that the party elders, if you will, or the Democratic Party establishment would step in and throw out a Biden or a Kerry. It gets really complicated at that point, but if that's the belief, and if panic sets in, whether it's after Nevada or at some point during Super Tuesday, if things are collapsing on Super Tuesday, you have to think that the party steps in.
Your view is that the Democratic establishment won't ultimately coalesce behind him, even if he does become the obvious nominee. Why is that?
Yeah, you're talking about a liberal socialist senator from Vermont, and I can't believe that they're thinking that this person as their party's nominee is going to be anything but a disaster for the party, not just for the White House, but for the House, the Senate, and governorships across the board. So it could be a potential Republican landslide that would last for a generation if they throw Sanders up, and I know that they see that.
This is a very important election because it's not only the House, the presidency, it's also the Supreme Court. So to your point, the Supreme Court's at stake. So, to set up a candidate that can't win will be even more critical to both parties. They'll want to be more proactive. But so, how do you think the Supreme Court nomination plays into this election, and what do you think actually happens there? On one hand, Obama has said very clearly he's got a constitutional both right and responsibility to put up a nominee. The Senate Majority Leaders come back and said this should be the next president's decision. We're clearly at an impasse already. Can we get out of that impasse if Obama puts up a candidate that's viable to the right, or or what happens?
Yeah, I don't think anyone is viable to the Republicans right now. I don't understand why roadblocks in forwarding the nomination. As President Obama said, it's his constitutional right to nominate somebody. It's Congress's constitutional right to give that person a fair hearing and block that person, as the Republicans probably will do. So I don't understand why they wouldn't go through the normal process here, because they do have 3 other ways to block that nomination. That is through the Judiciary Committee, by the way, where Ted Cruz sits, if I'm not mistaken. 2, through a cloture vote, a procedural vote, where they could not let the actual nomination advance to the floor. And 3, finally, for a final vote on the nominee. Democrats only have 46 seats in the Senate. The Republicans have
54.
The Democrats have 46 seats. The Republicans have 54. So that's if the Republicans all stand in unison, then they will block that nominee. Secondly, to your point on what this means, McConnell does have a fine needle to thread, because he does want to keep his base and the Republican base energized, as do the Democrats. So that's why there has to be the right nominee for Obama to throw up there.
Yep.
McConnell has a number of vulnerable Republicans at stake. And that's why I do believe that he needs to let this advance. You've got states like Pennsylvania, Illinois, Ohio, Wisconsin, and I believe an open seat that are all in these bluish or purplish states that he really needs to win. And I don't think you do that by blocking a nominee. I think you actually energize the blue state voters the other way. So it could backfire on McConnell if he doesn't play this.
What about the scenario where President Obama puts up a candidate that has the right conservative credentials? Like, is a candidate that the Republicans should support? Is it just a sacrificial lamb no matter what? You know, politically, the McConnell has to say there's no way.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, because I don't know that there's any conservative candidate that he would consider right now. He's looking at a number of centrists right now, and I think that's where the debate begins. If you're looking at conservatives, then maybe that does box in the Republicans, and that would probably be a smarter move. But then, by the same token, I haven't really gamed this out, but then does he end up ticking off his left wing and his liberal base by nominating someone conservative? So it's a very fine line for both parties right now. I think his best way forward is a centrist. I had this weird notion a couple of minutes ago that a win-win for everybody would be nominating sitting New Hampshire Senator Kelly Ayotte, who was the former Attorney General of New Hampshire. She's Republican. But imagine this: the Republicans couldn't block her.
Right.
He gets a female conservative, if you will, and she's in an endangered seat as she's up for re-election in New Hampshire this November. So that could be, it's far-fetched, but it interesting one nonetheless.
Well, no, that's an interesting concept, and JT, that's why we pay you the big bucks. So there's that. That's actually very insightful. Well, I think that's actually a wrap for this segment, but some great comments from JT, and this is going to be a fascinating election season and next 8 or 9 months. So we look forward to commentating weekly on this. Thanks a lot, JT.